10-Minute Murder contains depictions of actual crimes. What you are about to hear is real and violent in nature. Discretion is advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
Welcome to the brief and bingeable true crime podcast, 10-Minute Murder. I'm Joe, I'm the host, and thank you for being here. Now, if it's your first time, if you're brand new to the podcast, make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening right now. And connect with 10-Minute Murder on social media, Facebook and Instagram. I post visuals there that go along with the stories that you hear right here. And it's never gross and graphic. I'm not trying to gross you out. I'm not trying to give you nightmares. Just go there and you'll find all the visuals that go along with these episodes. 10-Minute Murder, just type it into the search bar on social media. It'll pop right up. Or if it's even easier for you, you can click the link that I've provided in the show notes of this episode. When 28-year-old bar manager Kitty Genovese was stabbed to death in New York in 1964, she was just one of the 636 murder victims in the city that year. No more than 4 paragraphs were written about her death in the newspaper. That all changed after the Times published a front-page article 2 weeks later, stating that 38 witnesses had seen Kitty's brutal attack taking place and did absolutely nothing. National outrage was sparked, and eventually, Kitty Genovese's murder took its place as one of the most famous in modern American history. Her story is still seen as a morality tale almost 60 years later. But what if the story had been wrong all this time? Catherine Kitty Genovese was born in Brooklyn, New York on July 7, 1935, to Italian-American parents Vincent and Rachel Genovese. She was raised Catholic alongside her 4 younger siblings. Kitty was known for her energy and zest for life and remembered as an outstanding student, graduating from Prospect Heights High School in 1953. Soon after, the Genovese family moved to New Canaan, Connecticut. Kitty's mother had witnessed a murder on the streets of New York and wanted to change. However, Kitty did not follow her family and remained in New York City, where she worked her days as a secretary at an insurance company and nights at a bar called Eve's 11th Hour. The bar was located in the Hollis neighborhood of Queens, where Kitty eventually moved as she was promoted to manager. Kitty was a hard-working employee who constantly worked double shifts to save up for her biggest dream, opening her own Italian restaurant. That did not seem too distant, as Kitty was doing quite well. At the time, she was earning $750 per month, or in 2021 dollars, $6,600. To her father's questions about finding a husband, she answered, quote, "No man could support me because I make more than a man." Not that Kitty wanted a husband anyway. On March 13th, 1963, she met Mary Ann Zielanko in West Greenwich Village nightclub called Swing Rendezvous, and the couple quickly fell in love. Soon, Kitty and Mary decided to move in together and found an apartment next to the Long Island Railroad Station in Kew Gardens, Queens. The area was considered a peaceful, safe place to live, but that image was about to break. On March 13th, 1964, around 3 a.m., Kitty had finished working at the bar. She was excited to get back home as it was her and Mary's first anniversary. So Kitty hopped into her red Fiat and began driving back home to their apartment. This time, however, Kitty was not traveling alone. Around 3:15 a.m., she parked her car in the Kew Gardens Long Island Railroad Station parking lot, just 100 feet from her front door. As Kitty walked toward the apartment complex, she heard footsteps. Frightened, Kitty began to run, but the person behind her quickly caught up and stabbed her twice in the back with a hunting knife. Kitty screamed, "Oh my God, he stabbed me. Help me." The person holding the knife was Winston Mosley, a 29-year-old married father of 2 with no criminal record. Winston lived with his wife, who was a night shift hospital nurse, and his mother, who shared child care duties. This arrangement established Winston's nighttime prowls and criminal activities. That night, on March 13th, he had been driving around purposely seeking victims. Winston had almost given up after 2 hours of searching, but then he had spotted Kitty and had turned his car around to follow her. When Winston finally reached his target, he took out his knife and struck. Kitty's screams were heard in apartments overhead, and Robert Moser looked out and quickly yelled, "Hey, get out of there. What are you doing?" Winston jumped up and ran away, giving Kitty enough time to move around to the back of her 2-story building, out of sight of the witness. But unfortunately, her injuries were too serious, and she collapsed at the bottom of the stairs before making it to the entrance of her apartment. Winston, who had returned to his car, quickly realized the police were not coming, and the neighbor yelling at him had closed his window again. So he moved his vehicle further away before walking back to the scene. Winston found Kitty lying in a hallway in the back of the building, still alive, twisting and turning, he said, bleeding and crying for help. Winston resumed his attack, stabbing Kitty, quote, till she was fairly quiet. After at least a dozen thrusts, Winston brutally raped Kitty, who at this point was barely breathing. Finally, he stood up, took $49 from Kitty's wallet, and left. Kitty was found soon after the second attack by neighbor Sophia Farrer, who screamed for help. At nearly 4 a.m., more than 30 minutes after the initial attack, a neighbor, Carl Ross, called the police. Sophia continued to hold Kitty in her arms until an ambulance arrived. Unfortunately, it was too late, and Kitty died en route to the hospital. The coroner found 13 stab wounds and numerous defensive wounds on her body. She had fought hard for her life, and may had lived had help arrived after the first attack. 5 days after Kitty's murder, the police arrested Winston for suspected robbery in Ozone Park. During questioning, he confessed to the murder of Kitty Genovese and 2 other women, 24-year-old Annie Mae Johnson, who had been shot and burned to death in February, and 15-year-old Barbara Kralik, who had been stabbed to death in July. Winston said that his motive for the attack was simply, quote, to kill a woman. Winston was eventually charged with the murder of Kitty, but he was never tried for the murders of the other 2 women. That's because a young man named Alvin Mitchell had already been charged with Barbara Kralik's murder. The 18-year-old Alvin had been interrogated by police 7 times over 50 hours, after which he signed a confession written by detectives. Winston served as a defense witness in Alvin's trial, which eventually ended in a hung jury, but Alvin was eventually convicted during a second trial. At his own trial that began on June 8, 1964, Winston pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity in the killing of Kitty Genovese, but was found legally sane. He was convicted of first-degree murder on June 11th and sentenced to death, as New York State still employed the electric chair at the time. However, in 1967, the State Court of Appeals reduced Winston's sentence to life imprisonment. In 1968, on a visit to the hospital for a minor surgery for a self-inflicted injury at Attica, Winston overpowered a guard, took his gun, and ran away. He was on the loose for several days, taking 5 hostages and raping a woman before he was finally recaptured. Winston received 2 additional 15-year sentences. During his years in prison, Winston Moseley was denied parole 18 times. He never got out again and died in prison March 28, 2016, at the age of 81, being one of New York's longest-serving inmates. Long before the death of Kitty Genovese's killer, her story made national headlines. New York Times posted a piece with the title, "37 Who Saw Murder Didn't Call the Police." Description of the crime stated, quote, "For more than half an hour, 38 respectable, law-abiding citizens in Queens watched a killer stalk and stab a woman." In the following years, psychologists and others wrote about the Genovese syndrome and the so-called bystander effect, stating that larger numbers of bystanders decrease the likelihood that someone will step forward and help a victim. So basically, the more witnesses, the less likely any one person will intervene. Kitty Genovese became a symbol of the certain apathy of life in big cities and sparked a national debate about bystander intervention. Her murder is also credited as one of the factors that pushed the 911 system to become the standard emergency number in 1968. But the truth is, there were never 38 eyewitnesses to the murder of Kitty Genovese, like the New York Times claimed. Although there could have been many more ear witnesses, many of them thought they heard drunks quarreling that night. Sophia Farrer, who ran to help Kitty and held her as she was dying, was never mentioned in the 1964 story. In addition, Bill Genovese, Kitty's brother, and the director James Solomon published a documentary movie called The Witness on October 6, 2015. They followed Bill's search for the truth about the circumstances of Kitty's murder. The documentary debunked initial reports of what happened that night and the legend of 38 witnesses. During the film, Bill interviewed A.M. Rosenthal, who was an editor with the New York Times when Kitty was murdered. The question, where did the number 38 come from? A.M. Rosenthal's answer tells everything we need to know. He said, quote, "I can't swear to God that there were 38 people. Some people say there were less. What was true, people all over the world were affected by it. Did it do anything? You bet your eye it did something, and I'm glad it did." That's today's 10-Minute Murder, the brief and bingeable true crime podcast. Thanks for listening today, and if you've got a request for, I almost sound like a radio DJ, if you've got a request, if you have a request for a story you think I should cover, you can email it to me, 10minutemurder@gmail.com. If you're connected with the podcast on Facebook or Instagram, you can send it via direct message to any of those. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast already, I don't know what you're doing with your life, but it's probably not cool things, so go ahead and subscribe to 10-Minute Murder. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, do me a huge favor, 5-star reviews, those go a long way to helping the show grow and reach more and more people. So my dog's freaking out over a tennis ball. So leave those 5-star reviews, and I appreciate it so much. Thanks for listening to 10-Minute Murder. Have a good night.
10-minute murder. 10-minute murder.